one to see if anybody knew what they're supposed to do when they got to that one spot. It's a good funeral song, for a believer, that is. Well, that's even better. That's even better. No, I like that song. That was the kids all liked that when I was growing up, because at one time you could shout and nobody cared. All right, we are in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 tonight. And Lord willing, we're going to do 12 verses tonight, because that's kind of where the paragraph breaks. Chapter 7 is a little bit longer. Next week is Mother's Day, so guys, here's your fair warning. I know it's not Saturday night yet, but Mother's Day's next week. It's here. And then I'm a little torn. My plan was to start the In His Image video series the Sunday night after Mother's Day, but we'll see, because I'm kind of torn. I might want to finish chapter 7 first, so we'll see how that goes. Again, be praying about that. In His Image series is what we'll do is we'll watch a portion of the video, and then we're going to discuss it together, discuss some scripture passages that surround it. But it is kind of all centered around the LGBTQ transgendered movement and how we should be responding to it. And so it's well done. American Family Association is involved in it, and I've been a supporter of them for years. But we're going to look at that together. Ecclesiastes chapter 7. One of the games that we used to play years ago, I don't know if y'all ever played it around here, was called Bigger and Better. It was a scavenger hunt. And basically at the scavenger hunt, we'd give each scavenger hunt group a penny. And their job was to go out, and you can't do this hardly anymore, go out in the community and knock on somebody's door and say, I've got a penny, I'm on a scavenger hunt with such and such church, and I need something that is bigger and better than a penny. And they had to gradually get up to bigger and better. Now, the best thing I ever had was somebody pulled a car in the parking lot one night. They cheated, because you weren't supposed to borrow anything. You were actually supposed to get it. You weren't supposed to. They borrowed Grandpa's car is what they did, which was cheating, but we gave it to them anyway. And that plays into this. The preacher of Ecclesiastes now uses a kind of a similar strategy in applying kind of this wisdom for life, this all is vanity world. He comes out of chapter 6 and talking about the passing of days on this earth. He comes out of this idea of being good stewards of our life. And at the very end, he says, who can tell a man what will happen to him afterwards, after he's gone under the sun? Remember that under the sun's always the indicator that we're leaving God out of the picture. When we move into chapter 7, he's actually answering part of that question. What am I supposed to do here? And so he makes a series of better than comparisons. Now, depending on what translation you use, you may not see them as clearly, but it's compromised of saying that better is this than that, is kind of the idea that comes up. And the key word is a simple Hebrew word that means good, but sometimes it can mean better or best. So the mistrust of human knowledge doesn't seem to keep him from offering some really practical advice and kind of commentary on the human advantage. And they're all arranged in couplets, and the first line of each couplet has a form and the sound almost like a proverb. It feels like a proverb or an adage or a quippy statement. And some people believe that Solomon at this point is actually using somebody's adage that was out there in culture or in the community, and then adding a second line to it. I don't personally believe that. It doesn't make sense that he's just putting a new twist on an old adage. I mean, he could do that. I just personally don't think that way. I think he composed them entirely himself. And so through all of this, our Koheleth, our teacher, is calling for a somber awareness of death, but yet calling us beyond them. And so we're going to get in here, and back in chapter 5, he kind of favored distraction, kind of just let's do different things so we don't have to think about death. And here he declares that the wise person takes the amount of time they have on this earth seriously and focuses on that. And so in chapter 7, verses 1 to 4, it kind of comes off almost like he's saying don't have festivals and don't have feasts. I don't think that that's what he's after. I think he's more after an awareness of our mortality. 5 and 6 work on the lessons of sobriety. 7 almost seems to come out of left field and kind of has its own context. And then we keep moving our way through here. And again, through chapter 7, and actually into chapter 8, he's discussing the importance of wisdom in daily life. Now, that shouldn't surprise us too much because Solomon's request of God, when whatever you want, ask me whatever you want, and I'll give it to you. And what was Solomon's request? Give me 900 wives. No, he did that on his own. Not exactly. I'm exaggerating numbers. Give me billions of dollars. No, he didn't ask. He says, give me wisdom. So is it any wonder that somewhere in the middle of all of this jostling around in his brain where he's gotten off track, he's allowed false gods into the kingdom. He has allowed the women in his life to control his kind of bent. It appears that he's not using his wealth appropriately. There's all kind of things. He's reached a point in his life where everything's catching up to him. He's been veering off the track just a little bit by little bit by little bit, and all of a sudden now he realizes he's in another county and didn't mean to. And now he's trying to process all of that, and he concludes all of this that even though wisdom ultimately cannot explain the mysteries of life because God is above our human wisdom, it can make positive contributions. So the key to all of this is actually in verse 14, where Solomon declares that God is the author of both adversity and prosperity, and that he mingles them together, that man in our finite understanding, what we can't grasp, cannot discover anything about our future. So there's a kind of a good lead in, and let's read these verses together, and we'll go from there.
Real quick, the Hebrew word for better is
Tav.
Good.
Yeah.
It's like
It depends on the context.
And this is gooder than good.
Yes.
Okay.
It depends. It's T-O-V. The Hebrew phrasing, the alliteration is T-O-V, and it just depends on its context. And anytime it's used in a comparison, it's usually better or best. That's the only thing that helps us is the comparison.
It's not like English.
No, it is not like English. I wish it were. It would have been a whole lot easier to learn. A good name, here it goes, a good name is better than precious ointment. The day of death is better than the day of one's birth. Better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For it is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Then for a man to hear the song of fools, for like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This is also vanity, vapor, emptiness. Surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. The end of the thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud. Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Do not say, where were the former days better than these? Why were the former days better than these? Where are the good old days? That's how you could translate that verse that way, and it'd be just fine. For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance and is profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense, and money is a defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Consider the work of God, for he who can make straight what he has made crooked. In the day of prosperity, be joyful, but in the day of adversity, consider. Surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will ever come after him. So we got a lot of ground to cover to work our way through. But it's pretty manageable when we start putting things together. We start off with the idea is making this way for wisdom to relish and cherish the sobering moments of life because they make you, if I say more ready to receive wisdom, they kind of like scratching up the surface of something that needs to be painted, getting ready for it to take on a good layer of painting. They're steel wool of our journey. And he starts off by talking about our name in the light of the end. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death better than one's verse. This verse reminds us that life is limited and death is a preacher with a very, very strong message, a very simple message, but strong. He begins with this idea, and it's kind of a play on words, that a good name is better than precious ointment because precious ointments were used for multiple things. And they were used in celebration and in feasting, but they were also used in burial preparations. So a little play on words there, and the link between those two halves work together. One commentator said, a good name is not securely established until the day of death. Someone who still lives may ruin their reputation. That's a mouthful. I mean, how many people, even in recent days, do we know of maybe pastors or preachers or TV evangelists or whatever who've gone years of their life, written good material and been faithful in their preaching, and then at the end of their journey they've made bad decisions? And what do we remember them for? We don't remember them for that bulk of their journey where they were faithful. We remember them for the choice that they made, the mistake they made, the sin they committed. And so it's kind of an important factor for all of us to remember. If you think of it this way, a birthday party is something you celebrate, a funeral is something you mourn. So there's kind of the balance that's going on. A good name is things such as influence and character, as a good reputation. We actually live in a nation that puts quite a bit of stock in names, if you think about it. We broadcast those all over the place. There's actually a manufacturer who says this way: the quality goes in before the name goes on. And that's kind of what Solomon's trying to get at here. It's as quality goes into our lives, as we are focusing on appropriate things, that a good name is developed, or good character. Swindoll says it this way: a good name is that which influence and is character, that which changes lives, that which has a fine reputation. A good name is certainly to be preferred to that which is simply has a pleasant aroma. In other words, the aroma goes away. The vapor of a smell only lasts for so long, unless your smeller's broke and you're taking a bath in your cologne. And that happens. It happens in my house quite often. But whoever invented this body spray stuff, and gals, I know some of y'all use it, the boys use, but whoever invented that stuff needs to be taken out behind the shed and whooped a few times. Remind them that a little dab goes a long way. We don't need it in aerosol form. But anyway, I digress. You might be thinking about the word potential at this point, that birth is all about potential, and death, for the believer anyway, is all about fulfillment. Christian parents have high hopes and dreams and prayers for their kids, but at the moment of death, and only at that one moment, does anyone perfectly receive all that Christ has been working in our lives. There's that moment of reward for the believer. Now, Solomon's kind of wrestling those things through. He continues that contrast going on in the last part of verse 1, and it's that day of death better than one's birth. It's kind of sobering when you try to process this for a little bit. Somebody said everybody has three names. One his father and mother gave him. One is what others call him. And then there's the one that he acquires for himself. So there's a name that your parents give you. There's one that people call you. And then there's another that you develop. Maybe that's an adjective. You might be thinking of a descriptive word. And he was faithful, he was honorable. But those are the kind of things. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 7, the memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. There's a good Sunday morning break you up and encourage you moment. In Proverbs chapter 22, verse 1, a good name is to be more desired than great wealth. Favor is better than silver or gold. Now, putting a little bit in this perspective, it's kind of sobering to think of how Solomon's name may have changed over time. As he received his name, it would have been a blessing, and probably had a good name of good character for a period of time, known as a grand architect, known as a good businessman, known as the wisest man in the world. But somewhere, slowly, by the choices and decisions, Solomon doesn't become equal to a good thing. Sometimes we attach names. I don't know anybody out there. I'm sure somebody's done it just because they don't know no better, but nobody, I probably shouldn't say this because somebody probably has a grandkid or something named this and I'll be in trouble later, but I don't think so. I mean, we don't call our little girls Jezebel. Look, sweet little Jezebels in our world. Why not? It's just a name. It's just a word, right? But there's a character, there's a connotation that goes with it. And thinking about the way we finish is important. Matthew 26, verse 13, truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of her in memory of her. Anybody know what story that's talking about? Mary of Bethany, and the whole debate of what are you supposed to be doing with rich and valuable things as she broke the vial of special perfume. Philippians chapter 1 also, verse 23 and 24, helps us answer this thought. I'm torn between the two, Paul says. I desire to depart, to be with Christ, which is by far better, but it's more necessary for you that I remain. That torn of death. Swindoll says, both Paul and Solomon are saying, if I had my druthers, I'd be out of this life and into eternity. Anybody ever felt like that along the way a few times? I'd rather be beyond this veil of tears and home to glory, enjoying the presence of the Lord. That's a lot better. So in the sense that the joyous days following our death are better than all the painful and stressful days that follow our birth, for those of us that know the Lord in a personal, intimate manner, it makes a deep, deep statement. Well, he continues on this vein in verse 2 and kind of mentions our date with death, if you will. It's kind of a weird thing. It's better to go to funerals than spend your time at festivals. Anybody sign me up? We're going to start going to every funeral. We're going to skip all the festivals and all the happy things, and we're going to go and hang out at the funerals. For you're going to die, And it's a good thing to think about it while you're still alive. That's kind of a rough paraphrase of what this verse is kind of talking about. There is a danger sometimes that we might try to avoid confrontations with the reality of death, and as a result, we end up not taking life seriously. It's a sobering thing for us to remember that it is appointed unto man once to die, and after that the judgment. That's a very, very sobering thing. Now, we use that verse most commonly for a salvific purpose, where we're sharing the gospel with somebody and we're trying to emphasize to them that this life isn't all there is, and after this life is over, there's going to be a judgment. But remember, as believers, we're also going to give an account for the stewardship of what the gifts we've been given, how we've used them or not used them, how the opportunities that God has given us, whether we used them or abused them. Psalm chapter 90, verse 12 reminds us to teach us our number, our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Understanding that there is a time in my life where I'm going to check out, goes directly in contrast to eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. It's different when we contemplate and number the number of days that we have on this earth and how we are stewarding them. But in the presence of sickness and death, those kind of things, they kind of push us to think about really important issues, don't they? You go to a festival, everybody has a good time, but we may or may not be thinking about ultimate issues. You go to a funeral, now we're talking about stuff that's more serious, for example. I did the funeral years ago now. There were 4 kids in a Corvette, took a corner at 120 miles an hour, and 3 of the 4 were killed. They were all under 18. I knew 2 of them personally. And the overwhelming thing, hundreds of kids from the high school at this funeral. Huge, huge outpouring. They had to cut off the line for viewing because there was just so many kids coming. But over and over, I heard the same thing the whole night, talking to kids, and then in the day of the funeral. Why? Why? Why did this happen? All of a sudden, now it's personal. And I want to know, why did something like this happen? Until this point, people live, people die, but now it's personal. It's in my world. Where is mom or dad? I really hate that question. Because just so you know, I guess I could throw this out there. If you ask me to do a funeral of somebody who is a loved one or somebody that you care about that you know is not a believer, I will do their funeral. That's not a problem for me. But please do not ask me to say that they're in a better place or they've got their wings now or any of that stuff, because I won't do it. I don't like to be pushed in that moment. Where is dad? Where is mom? When I know in my heart of hearts, because of talking to them, that they've rejected the gift of salvation and they are suffering. Now, I don't want to be the person that says that at a funeral of all places. I have a pat answer. And I know everybody's going to say, well, what do you say? This is what I say. Well, if your mom, dad, aunt, uncle, cousin, sister, even in the last moments of their life, realized that they were a sinner and believed that Jesus died and was buried and rose again, and they honestly, by faith, asked him to come into their life, I believe they would be saved, and only saved people can go to heaven. And that's the closest thing to hope I can give somebody at that moment of death when they're looking for something to hang on to. This kind of verse kind of smacks us all of a sudden, because he's talking about all this kind of enjoy this, do that, building buildings, collecting. He's talking about how empty that is, but then all of a sudden he switches from all this positive stuff in life to a very quote-unquote negative thing. remember that Solomon is not really consistent in what he values, and sometimes he seems to almost give conflicting advice, and that's that under heaven, under the sun. Those two words are so crucial in the book of Ecclesiastes because they're a window into what Solomon's thinking at that moment. Now, don't be too hard on Solomon. I mean, we do the same thing. There are times that we are thinking more biblically than we're not. There's times when God's word is really pervading what we're doing and affecting what we're doing. And there's times when we're not. It's kind of like this morning when I challenged, just threw it out as a challenge, and hopefully some of you took it. When you turn the car key on, thank God that it turned on. Well, how many times we turn the car over and it turns on and we don't say anything? We don't bring God into that moment. I'm not necessarily you're a wicked person because you don't do that. I'm not trying to say that. But when Solomon leaves God out, he has a certain perspective. And then when he brings God into stuff, then he has a different perspective. God's word, God's truth change our perspective. It's almost as he says, this is what all men do. They all die. And the living should take it to heart. That's the last part of verse 2. Some people say that he's trying to teach some kind of moral lesson, but I think he's trying to challenge us as readers and those who would read this, that not that we should become preoccupied with death. That's kind of creepy. We've got whole movements out there that are kind of focused on death and loss, the Goth movement that was so popular years ago. Not to that point, but the contrast of saying, I don't even want to think about it. Don't talk about it. I want to talk about death. Well, I think now that I've got a few more years on my life than what I did have, and some of you are older than I am, I think the closer we get to it, the less we want to think about it, the less we want to talk about it. I said, death isn't no big deal. Now, the process, well, that's kind of a little concerning because we don't know how that's going to happen. And it'd be nice if God, dropped it in your head, okay, you're going to be in a car wreck on such and such a date, such and such a time, that's how you're going to go. You're going to have a massive heart attack, but I don't know if it'd really change us all that much because he really wants to get a hold of our heart, not a hold of circumstances and things, just because we know information. I reference Swindoll a lot in this message because if you've not read his book, Living on the Ragged Edge, it's an older book. It's been around for a while. Living on the Ragged Edge by Swindoll is a good book. And he's commenting on Psalm chapter 90, verse 12, which I read to you a little bit ago. So, teach us to number our days so that we might apply our hearts to wisdom. He says this, a blunt paraphrase of the comparison would read, visiting a funeral parlor is better than gorging oneself at a banquet. Or, a 30-minute stroll through a graveyard is better than an entire afternoon at a carnival or spending the weekend in Vegas. I'm creepy. If you haven't figured that out yet, you know something's off. I like old cemeteries. I like going into old cemeteries. I'm not preoccupied with death, but I'm interested in the epitaphs, the slogans that are on grave sites. And it's interesting to me, here lies Fred, he was here, but now he's dead. Doesn't do a whole lot for me. But the ones that say things like, he loved well, gone but not forgotten, or he lived for Christ, or, in heaven with you. Those statements, those little epitaphs, I think can be challenging to where we are each at. And so as we approach this topic of death and dying, for the child of God, the old spiritual had it right. Death ain't no big deal. It's just my pathway into eternity. It's my pathway into the presence of God. It's my graduation ceremony. It's my nap until I get there. It's a very minor thing. Now, don't try to tell everybody else who's left behind that it feels that way, because there's true impact to that. But for us, our focus needs to be on the life that we are living so that as we are remembered in our passing, and as death comes calling, that we will have left a good name, a good reputation around. I read a story, and none of you would ever do this. And I say this honestly, I've not had any difficulties with anybody since I've been here, and I don't want anybody to get started. But the old story of the pastor was having a trouble with a difficult man in the church that just kind of griped and groaned and complained about this, that, and the other thing. Didn't really have anything positive to say, and the pastor finally had enough, and he says, "You need to be careful, young man." And then he had some little smart aleck comment to come back. Well, I mean, he'd be careful. He says, "I'm going to do your funeral someday. And I'd like to have a few nice things to say." Yeah, I know that's humorous, but the reality is somebody's going to write your obituary someday. I've seen some nasty obituaries, too, where kids have taken vengeance on their dead parents. Written this nasty, they never cared about me, they left me alone. I've read a few of those, and there's not a lot of them. But it takes some gall to put something like that in the newspaper, I'd say. But again, the emphasis here is how you live your life so that when death does come, you're prepared. Verses 3 and 4 talks about joking around instead of being serious. Now we're in trouble because I've been joking around, so I got to get serious now. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. You could translate verse 3 that for though the face is sad, the heart may be glad. Even though the face may be sad, the heart may be glad. It's almost, in Hebrew, there's a rhyme going on. There's a rhyme going on in Hebrew. The Hebrew words rhyme, and so it's a little bit, we don't get it in English, but in Hebrew, that puts us into that. Kind of seems to be a response to Proverbs chapter 15. A joyful heart makes a cheerful face, and a sad heart makes a despondent mood. That idea that having the wrong expressions, if you will. Now, I don't think that we want to go all the way into the whole joking around thing too far, but there's a double meaning with this idea of a bad face or a sad countenance or all of those words. It means to have a scowl. The word is, the old word is to have a vexed, some a troubled, kind of just bitter look on the face. And in some Hebrew commentators think that that's directly proportionate to anger because he's going to bring up anger later. I don't see the direct connection to that angry face, instead of using the word sad. It's kind of maybe a response to chastisement, and that which is intended to improve the listener's heart, the listener's mind. Those words all come into saying here. Before we could do a few things with this, it would have been better for the generation of the flood if God had earlier shown them his angry face so he'd got them on the right path. Would that have worked? Did you guys ever do with your kids, show me your happy face? We did that with our kids. Show me, they'd get that upset about something, that ugly face. Show me your happy face. Sometimes they were sad and we were like done. You understand what I'm saying? We're done with the crying thing. And show me your happy face. And they're like, trying to turn up the corners of their mouth. Another comment, it would have been better if David had scolded his sons rather than laughing with them. There could be some truth to that because David's boys caused a little bit of trouble. The the praise here, and even the chapter 5 talks about the chastisement, verse 5 talks about chastisement. And I like to joke a lot. I like to pick on people. I like to harass people. And I don't know, it's just part of who I am. My wife's humor and mine are completely opposite. Who's preaching here, Daryl? Oh, my. Again, the influence here is sadness has a refining influence on us. It teaches us here that there are lessons to be learned when we're going through the tough days of life. When sadness is upon us, after a quick laugh or a joke, it's amazing how quickly we forget it. You ever tried to repeat a joke? I hate doing that because I always forget exactly how the punchline went. You got it, you've got the build up good, and you're going along, and then you go, bye-bye, and they're like, huh? But moments of sadness, moments of chastisements, moments of being set aside for a time, we tend to remember those things and why we're doing it. That's the purpose, discipline is always the purpose of restoration. And with our kids, raising them, we disciplined them. And the discipline, we tried to keep it commensurate with whatever the crime is. We wanted punishment and crime to match somewhat. I didn't always get that right. The punishment sometimes was harsher than the crime. But there was a response to it. And the goal was to help them remember, don't do that again. This behavior is unacceptable, inappropriate. Don't do that in the future. And that's the kind of attitude we need to work with. It's kind of hard here. The word heart that gets translated in verse 3 and 4 could be the word mind. It's the heart of wisdom. It's the mind of wisdom. It's an all-consuming word, but it's not like what we commonly think of asking Jesus into your heart. That's not what the heart of wisdom. It's deeper than that. It's maybe you could use the word character is better. The countenance of your character is made better through sad moments of life. Those would be. There'll be some good moments. Solomon's advice is in view of good moral choices. Present-day society emphasizes self-centered hedonism and desperately needs to get some reminders. The things that we've gone through and the things we've learned as a country have been forgotten in some ways. And that's part of the problem. We've forgotten the difficult moments, what it took to get here. Just on a secular, totally, non-church moment here, there's things that our country has learned through the years how to better do something that we just kind of forgot. And that's the idea again. There's a story about the sinking of the Titanic. And there was a frightened woman. She was getting on the lifeboat, and she realized she had left something back in her stateroom. And so she gets off the boat. Okay, problem number 1. 2, she goes through the crowds, through the people to get back to her stateroom. And the guy who let her off the boat told her, you've got 5 minutes, and that's it. So she ran through the crowds and the tossing of the water and the hallways, and she went past her expensive jewelry. She ran back past all of her photographs, and she grabbed 3 oranges. And then she found her way back to the lifeboat. What seemed so insignificant before, and almost a luxury before, has now become potentially life-saving. 3 pieces of fruit. She's valued, instead of valuing the jewels, she's valuing survival in that moment. And again, that's the idea. Life and death gives us a good new perspective, or gives us a good perspective. Wisdom also rebukes in light of words of praise, verses 5 and 6. It's better to hear the chastisement or the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools, for the crackling of thorns under the pot So is the laughter of the fool. This is also vanity. And here Solomon is comparing the praise of fools to the burning thorns underneath the campfire, comparing the frivolous pleasure and their songs and their laughter and their giggling to the crackling, burning brush underneath it. How long does that brush, last? Not very long. The brush and the twigs and the things that are fire starters are consumed quickly. And Solomon here is saying that this is emptiness. And at the beginning of those kind of fires, when you're starting it, they're really noisy, especially if your twigs got a little bit of green. They're crackling, and you can hear the popping and stuff. But that goes away. It's kind of fun while it's making all that racket, just hearing that word, but there's not a lasting idea here. In Woolward's Bible Knowledge Commentary, it says this: a wise person's rebuke will accomplish far more in our lives than will the flattery of fools. Somebody who's just buttering you up all the time and always, and it's nothing wrong with being nice. Sometimes just overboard, always just not wanting to deal with the serious stuff. If you and I are going to be serious about God's plan, we also need to be ready for serious conversations. And those serious conversations often come from those who are more experienced in life, and we should be ready for criticism from them. And I mean good kind of criticism, not complaining just for the sake of complaining. But you know what the hardest part for us, those of us at this point in our journey to do, is to have some little twerp like this come along and say, do you mind if I talk to you about, and begins to unveil some words that we said or some actions that we took that weren't biblical. And our first response is, he's just a young whippersnapper. We don't have to listen to that stuff. It goes away, just for the record. Youth is a disease, and then you get healed and become an adult. But the reality is, who the rebuke comes from is important. But the more important thing is that we stop and we think about what's being rebuked. Is what this person is bringing up something I've done? Is it something that they feel like I've done? Remember, feelings are unreliable, notoriously. And I've had the conversation more than once where somebody's telling me I said something and I know didn't. And eventually say, well, I felt that's what you said. Okay, now we can deal with what we need to deal with because we're getting... Now I can say, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. That was not what my words were. That's not what I intended. And we can get on a good level. But regardless of where it comes from, we need to count those as blessing. The laughter, the celebration of fools, it's revelry. I mean, you go to, I don't know, what do you want to pick, your most wicked place in the world, and there's celebration going on, and things are just bad. I mean, it's loud. There's laughter. There's an enjoyment amongst their peers who are like-minded. But we look from the outside and we're going, oh my, what are you doing? Everything you're doing is unbiblical. You're not even getting close. These aren't even questionable things. These are outright commands of God you're violating here. And we're looking from the outside and we're looking at, and that's, again, Solomon is saying, be careful about the celebration of fools. I've had, through the years, a few people ask me, Pastor, I'm doing my best to live a good Christian life, and I'm striving to follow Jesus, and I'm doing everything I can. But I seem to just struggle to get through day by day. And my neighbor, they're wicked. They're mean. And they say all kinds. They talk about people. They curse. They swear. And they've got a boat. Look at this. Why are wicked people getting good things to happen? good perspective is why do bad things happen to good people? That question flows in there. But I always remind people when they bring that question up, remember, for them, this is all there is. That boat, that's all there is. That party, that's it. For you and I, we've got much greater things awaiting us than a boat. And so that foolish celebration needs to be brought back in perspective. We're talking about being mature in wisdom in verses 7 to 10. And they're teaching us how to have a godly perspective about what's happening in the world. So in verse 7, we talk about a mature person has character. Surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. Having recommended that it was wise to live life in light of it being brevity, to heed the warnings of the wise, Solomon then warns his readers of that there are other temptations that are going to be out there to pull you to abandon a wise lifestyle and going to pull you away from pursuing the heart of wisdom and godly things. And again, I think this is one situation where Solomon's saying, trust me, I've been there, done that. I really have. And listen, you know, I want you to understand as far as the aged, whatever that means, maybe you don't like that term, the grown-ups in the room, not you. That's mean. He's an adult. I shouldn't be mean to him. I know. But remember, I like to pick on people, so you're stuck. But you are valuable to the overall makeup of our church because you've made some mistakes. And you've been down the road a little bit. And some of you have longer stories in your salvation story than others. Some of you lived a life before you accepted Christ, and we call it a radical transformation. The reality is all salvation is radical transformation. But, you know, those juicy testimonies some people have of, you know, I was on drugs for 20 years and eating out of the garbage can and, you know, drinking out of puddles in the alley. And we migrate to those stories. But the reality is all the stuff you've gone through in your journey, you need to invest in the next generation whenever you have a chance. If you hear somebody who's going through something, they're going through a journey of making bad choices, and you have the opportunity to say, look, listen, I do know right where you're at. You may not believe me because I look like I could never have been there that long ago. You may think I was helped to invent the wheel, but I'm not. I really am not. But listen, this is what I did in my life. And you begin to tell them the story, and all of a sudden, the lines are matching up, and the story's matching up. And then you say, look, I made the wrong choice, and I don't want to see you do that. Pass on the wisdom that you have learned and share that with the next generation. And again, this whole idea is maybe could say beware of easy routes. They also often become expensive detours. Before GPS, did anybody ever go off a map and you decided there's a shortcut, but it was one of those real thin lines on the map? You know what that means, right? There's no divided highway. There's no two-lane road. You just had this little thin line. I'm going to take that road. And then you end up taking that road and you added 3 hours to your trip, or you found out you were going to run out of gas. Wiersbe shares the story, being aware of easy routes, they become expensive. 1976, my wife and I were driving through Scotland, and a friend mapped out a faster route from Balmoral Castle to Inverness. And it turned out to be a hazardous one-lane road that the local people called the Devil's Elbow. Then en route, we met a bus and a cement truck. He comments, he says, watch and pray was our verse for the day. So Solomon's emphasis here is the long haul versus the shortcuts, and being careful not to take dangerous shortcuts. And the devil will bribe you to take a shortcut. I remind our young people whenever I have a chance, when it comes to this issue of pornography and premarital sex. It's a bribe to accept something that is good, that will be pleasurable, that will satisfy something, but it's a shortcut that takes you off track for what God's best is, the best desire. Satan bribes us with good things. Listen, I think we need to, now you might disagree with me. There's no theological basis for what I'm about to say. Satan does not show up with horns and a pitchfork and a tail. Now, some people believe that, when he fell, that something changed about him. We don't have any record that he changed. In fact, he's described as an angel of light and a morning star and all these descriptions of his beauty, and he was an archangel. He's in charge. He's one of these boss guys. Don't think he's always going to throw out the worst option for you to try. He's going to offer us a bribe to accept something good in place of God's best. And good things sometimes take us off track. Good intentions. We've got to be careful. Verse 8, a mature person is patient. The end of the thing is better than at its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud of the spirit. When he uses the word end here, the end of a thing, it's more like the word would be better translated as the outcome of things. The outcome of something is better than the process, if you will, or what happens at the beginning. Many things don't seem to be all that promising at the beginning, but they turn out pretty good in the end. Can we use our little caterpillar friends for an example of this? Not everybody enjoys them in their little wormy state as they wiggle along or get on your patio ware or wherever, and that little bug. See, I like them. I think they're fun to let their little suction cups and feel their little furry stuff, but some of y'all don't like that. But that little worm goes through a metamorphosis, a change, and comes out with something that everybody seems to like. Everybody likes butterflies. They're pretty. Even when they're moths, people think they're beautiful until you realize what kind of damage those things do. But it looks bad, but there's something better. And the reality is even going through negative things in life, we always need to be reminded that God is working out something that is going to glorify Him in maximum form and make me a better person in the process. And don't get those mixed up. Don't say I'm going to get a better person, be a better person in process, and then God's going to get glory. Because the first and supreme thing that's going to come out of our life and the things that we're going through is not that we're going to get better, but that God gets the glory and I get better. It's focusing on that perspective. Some people will say it all's well that ends well. I don't know about that. Some people apply Romans 8:28, which is another widely misused verse, but we know that all things work together for good to those who are loved and called according to purpose. As long as you get the next verse in there, you're all right. You need Romans 8:29 to understand Romans 8:28. It's far better to wait patiently and humbly for God to work out His plan than to get angry with God and demand your own way. This one's a tough one. Wiersbe, his commentary says this: God always saves the best wine until last, but Satan always starts with the best and leads the sinner into suffering and even death. Patience is a struggle in our fast-paced world, and sometimes I don't do very good with this. And I'll share with you a totally unbiblical premise because the reverse is actually true. Be careful when you talk to God and ask Him to teach you patience. You remember how patience plays out. It comes through suffering. The New Testament plays it clear. It's as we're going through those bad spots of life that we're learning ultimately what patience looks like and that pursuit of this. The idea is, well, let me read Swindoll again on this topic. How much better to be calm than angry, because with a patient spirit there emerges a groundswell of wisdom. On this pilgrimage from earth to heaven, one of God's greatest goals is the development of our inner character, which implies the replacement of a proud spirit with a patient spirit. As that transpires, wisdom has a platform on which to work. Our prideful or haughty spirit pushes wisdom aside, and when it does, we end up playing the fool. And that's that angry of, God, why can't you give me this by Friday? You know, dear Lord, Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your many blessings. And here's what I need. And if you could do it by Friday, I'd really appreciate it. The process with us is important. A notable example of this comes from the history of the Israelites. When the people of God returned to Jerusalem after their long exile in Babylon, they built another temple. And as construction begins, there's people kind of complaining that it's not going to be impressive. It's not going to be as good as what was. But Zechariah promises that who has despised the day of small things shall rejoice. And that new temple started small, but it was bigger. And you've been through situations where we could do this. We could go to the whole plan of salvation. It starts off in a stable. And it takes time for the story to unfold. A young bride and her husband, a few shepherds, and a baby. And that baby was going to revolutionize the world and transform every empire that would sit under his rule. The end is much better than the beginning. I love Christmas. I think it's a fantastic story, but there's another story yet to unfold in our eyes. It's going to be even greater. I love to sing From the Grave He Rose, and we'll celebrate the resurrection for all eternity. The resurrection is what makes the second coming and the rapture of the church possible. But to think about the greater thing of seeing him face to face someday. It's all part of God's plan. Verse 9, do not hasten in your spirit to be angry. A mature person controls their temper. This admonition doesn't contradict anything that's been said already. Back in verse 3 when we talked about that word angry face. But it warns to be not easily angered. When things don't go right from the start or the delay happens, the temper boils. Proverbs has many, many descriptions. A man of a quick temper acts foolishly. He who is hasty in temper exalts folly. And then the counterpart of that is a wise man. A wise man is slow in his anger. I'm reading a book that goes along with Ecclesiastes by an author by the name of Ryken. It's called Ecclesiastes, Why Everything Matters. He says this: one of the easiest ways to tell whether you and I are really trusting God's timing or not is to see how angry we get when things don't go our way. It's the sin of exasperation on the journey. If we put verses 8 and 9 together, we see how often we embark on something with pride and our ability to carry it out, and we end up abandoning it because of discouragements, and then we become angry, and we lash out at other people. This is more applying to rash anger. I don't know. Some people say, well, God just made me an angry person. Does that fit? Now, I believe that some of us, more by nurture than by nature, struggle more with this thing called a temper and being angry quickly. But that doesn't mean it can't be controlled, because all of our natural impulses can be controlled by the Spirit of God who dwells us. And that rolls over into so many areas of life. Our quote-unquote natural, or things we learned are right, can be overturned through the influence and the power of the Holy Spirit. Usually we tell ourselves we have the right to be angry, but Solomon seems to see our anger for what it is. It's sinful, it's folly, it's immaturity, and ultimately it's usually an underlying mistrust of the sovereignty of God. Somehow God's not getting it right, whether it's between me and another person, or me and the car that we're throwing the hammer at, or me and the wall that doesn't quite go the way you want it to go up, and those angry moments. As soon as you and I become impatient, we need to ask the Holy Spirit to keep us from doing anything foolishly, from saying anything foolishly. Catch it quick, because God's got something greater in mind. Well, I'm not going to push through. It's a little bit after 7. I don't want to push through anything tonight, so we'll pick up here as we come back. That kind of answers my question, what I'm going to do, because I'm not going to leave in the middle of chapter 7 to start that other thing. What are your thoughts about tonight, this better than situation? Are you catching it? These are so pithy, it sounds like, well, of course this is better than that. Of course it is. Until you're going through it. And then we tend to surrender to the easy. It's easier sometimes to be angry than it is to control your temper. It's easier to say something quickly and harshly than it is to stop and think about something and pray about something before you do it. The easy way out is I keep hearing that as I read through these verses. It always seems to be like the easy way out, the path of least resistance, this idea of just taking the simple instead of pursuing what is best. And as we take those little detours of what's easier or what seems better in our eyes, we're just gradually moving away, and then we get to the end of our lives, and our character, our reputation has been marred because of a few foolish decisions. I have a specific story in my mind of a national leader who made choices, and you could see it when you read this person's story. You can see how the foolish decisions began, and nobody helped out. That's one thing that frustrated me in this particular story, is like, where were the godly men in his circle who said, that's not smart, don't do that? But it was just one little choice, one little decision, one little linking arms with another organization that pulls away from Scripture, that pulls away from things. And it's usually not major off-ramps that catch us. It's the minor detours that end up ruining us. So we need to be very cautious of those things. Pretty straightforward tonight as we go through this, but it's a lot to swallow, isn't it? It's a lot to try to process and say, okay, now what do I do with this? If Solomon is saying that a wise person or a mature wise person controls their temper, well, am I wise? That's the counter question. Am I choosing the better and demonstrating wisdom, or am I sacrificing the good or sacrificing the best for what is good and what gets me by? I think these are really good challenges as we get into the book. We're a little over halfway through Ecclesiastes, and I know some people are like, "Can we just get out of Ecclesiastes? Some of this is a little depressing." Well, that's one of the reasons we're going to take a break and watch this series. But there is so much good stuff in here, and what I like about Ecclesiastes, we entitled this series "Things That Matter" as we approach the whole book. And what I hear is an old guy who's at the end of his life sitting on the back porch with a load of regret, trying to pass on wisdom in the twilight years of his life. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't pursue the pathway that I pursued, or you'll be a miserable old man just like me. And maybe I'm off on that, but that's kind of what my mind pictures with Solomon in writing Ecclesiastes. God, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for your truth that helps us, that guides us. God, may we always be in pursuit of your very best. Help us not to sacrifice those things which are the ultimate prize for small carnival toys that will get lost and broken quickly. Help us to pursue those things which will last eternally. Help us to focus on our character and our conduct in such a way that when all is said and done, people will look back on our lives, and God, it's my prayer that as I would desire to be remembered at the point is that I loved you with all of my heart and I loved people. And whatever our goal in life is, every believer desires to pursue that journey where we will hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. That's our pursuit. And we know the enemy wants to trip us up on the journey. Lord, I pray that we're not making heaven by the skin of our teeth, but we are out front and running full arm, full force, pressing on to the prize, that we may ultimately glorify you for the ability to do any of it. We praise you and we thank you in all these things. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Have a good week, folks. We do have prayer meeting Wednesday night, even though Awana's not on. So Awana has shifted. So maybe some of our Awana workers will be able to join us back in prayer meeting. And then next Sunday, Mother's Day. It's the one Sunday a year a pastor can beat up on moms and get by with it.
No, they usually beat up on the fathers.
No,
Everything's about mom's so wonderful and dad needs to do this, and this.
yeah, I don't know. I think they both are kind of beat up days. We try to challenge our focus. I think I'm preaching a message called Pots and Pans for Mother's Day. I think that's what I'm planning on preaching next week. So.